All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here again, talking about real music in real time for real people, just like you and just like me. So, the CEO and president of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has chimed in about the latest controversy concerning Iron Maiden, who, are an impactful, influential band. He says there's no doubt. It's funny that these websites that claim to be about rock are somewhat apologetic when they cover these topics, almost as if, well, I don't really want to bite the hand that feeds me here. And this guy, Greg Harris, he's the president of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And fans are a little bit dejected, a little bit upset that Iron Maiden has been snubbed again and that rapper Jay-Z is on his way into the Hall of Fame. Kind of the visceral thing to say is Jay-Z is not rock and roll, Iron Maiden is rock and roll, and there's your equation. That's the very simple sort of let's just get it out there and say it. But it's more to it than that, because this guy opens up a can of worms in this interview he did on WBAB radio. By the way, the Foo Fighters, Jay-Z, Tina Turner, the Go-Go's, Carole King, and Todd Rundgren all being inducted this time around. I'm kind of okay with everything except for Jay-Z and Foo Fighters. Some people say, well, Dave, come on, you're just not cool on the Foo Fighters. You just don't like them. Yeah, that's part of it. But again, let me give you a brief list of some of the bands that aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ready? Okay, Bad Company, Badfinger, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, incredibly influential band they were. Blue Oyster Cult, Boston. Bryan Adams is not, let me say that again, Bryan Adams is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. BTO, and the Guess Who. So anything Randy Bachman does, apparently he can't win. Another part of it is the Canadian thing. Dave Matthews Band, Eddie Money, the late great Eddie Money should be in. ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer is not in. Foreigner, Grand Funk Railroad, Ian Hunter and Mott the Hoople, Jethro Tull, Jimmy Buffett, Joe Cocker, Joe Walsh as a solo artist, John Mayall, Judas Priest, Kansas, Meatloaf, Pat Benatar, Peter Frampton, and or Humble Pie. Crazy. Humble Pie is not in the Hall of Fame. Phil Collins, again, as a solo artist. Procol Harum, REO Speedwagon, Scorpions, The Smiths, Soundgarden, Sting, Styx, and Thin Lizzy. I'm not too big at putting Sting or Soundgarden in there, but you could make a better argument for either one of those two artists over Jay-Z. So, and that's just a partial list. Jim Croce isn't in, should be in. There are so many other people that I've mentioned doing videos over the years that aren't in the Hall of Fame. This guy goes on to tell me how to think, which I hate. All right. I don't like when people tell me how to think about stuff. He says, to get to the core of it, people like the stuff that's closest to them. And I think they need to expand their thinking of rock and roll. It's a big tent. Rock and roll was never just four skinny guys with long hair and guitars. No, it was Chuck Berry. It was Fats Domino. Those weren't skinny guys with guitars. I think he's trying to say, using like the Beatles maybe, or the British Invasion type bands. Not sure. He goes on. It's always been diverse. Yes, but here's the road. And yeah, it's a big road. There are many lanes on that road, but there are different highways. There's a rap highway. There's a jazz highway. I don't see jazz artists being nominated. Where's George Benson? Right? I mean, if Jay-Z is in, where's George Benson? And you can go on. I mean, I could find a lot of others. I'm sure over on Patreon, people will send me their own list or their own artist that they have been following that just, they didn't mention Huey Lewis in the News. That's another artist. It's pretty sad. It really is. He goes on, we take that interpretation that these are all variants of rock and roll. Oh, okay. So these are variants. So new interpretations. If it doesn't sound like rock and roll, it could be rock and roll, right? I mean, that's basically what he's saying here. It frequently gets to the hip hop question because some people are not fans. No. It's not that we are not fans. That might be part of it. Okay. For me, that's true. But here's where I have an issue. It's about the actual genre. Is what Jay-Z does, is that rock and roll? I bet you most fans of Jay-Z would say, no, it's rap. It's hip hop. How is it rock and roll? People know the difference between AC/DC and Jay-Z. Anyway, and if he's trying to say that you need to get over your misinterpretation of what you think rock and roll is, he goes on to say, it's an attitude, it's a spirit. That's rock and roll. And he says, the fact of the matter is that ship has sailed, meaning that they've already inducted artists like Jay-Z, which is true. And he goes on, we've inducted quite a few artists in that canon. It's a big tent and everybody fits under it. Okay, then again, where's George Benson? All right, the reason I mentioned George Benson is Grammy Award-winning guitarist, incredible singer, had his own attitude, definitely had his own thing. Certainly fits an attitude and a spirit. He doesn't define where that attitude is or where that spirit is on the spectrum. He just says it's those things. That's rock and roll. And I disagree with that. I fervently disagree with that. Look, there are mild-mannered rock stars out there that play really good and should be in the Hall of Fame, right? Mild-mannered bands. And he's saying it's an attitude and it's a spirit, almost like saying, if you cause enough chaos and controversy, then maybe you should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And to me, that just, it's like a waste of energy to be all involved in all this extracurricular nonsense to attract. It's almost like you're a social media star. And because of the social media attention, that makes you influential. What about the music? What about the spirit of the music? Does it move you? Does it make you happy? Does it, bring different emotions? I mean, I think he's trying to make that argument in a roundabout way, but I just think if you're going to talk about rock and roll, there are certain elements that make up rock and roll. It's like finding out what ingredients are in your, bread and saying, okay, I need flour and yeast and whatever. And this doesn't have any of those ingredients. It's different. And if you say that out loud nowadays, I think you get in trouble. So the Rock Hall didn't induct Black Sabbath until 2006. Metallica got in 3 years later. The point of this website is basically that hard rock and heavy metal bands have trouble getting in. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Even though you would think that they have the spirit and the attitude more so than many others. Kiss, they were eligible in 99, didn't get in until 2014. Deep Purple, they were eligible in 93 and they didn't get in until 2016. Judas Priest, they have missed it twice in 2018 and 2020. They've been eligible since 1999. It's getting a little silly. Iron Maiden, of course, was on the ballot this year, but didn't make the cut. By the way, Iron Maiden is one of the biggest bands on the planet. Since the arrival of its self-titled debut album, they have had 15 full-length studio records since then and sold over 100 million copies. but they don't. One thing about the Hall of Fame, they don't care about record sales. They don't. And when this website says, hey, they're one of the biggest bands on the planet, they're using record sales, they're using their fan base, their loyal fan base. But this is a band that has their own sound, has been incredibly influential, has done amazing marketing. And by the way, back in the day when they started, they didn't have any radio support whatsoever. They were deemed unworthy to be on the radio, or too spooky, scary, whatever it is, whatever, I think one or two of their songs may have grazed rock radio when they came out. But Iron Maiden, for the most part, has never been on a radio station near you, ever. So it's amazing what they've accomplished, at least here in the States, that's true. Maybe over in Europe, they had radio airplay. But the point is, what they've accomplished is extraordinary, and that makes them even more worthy for the Hall of Fame. And I'm not even a huge fan of Iron Maiden. So it just goes to show you, my bias isn't about Jay-Z versus Iron Maiden. My bias is more about, is this actually rock and roll, or have we gone off the rails? And I think, it's not to say that Jay-Z shouldn't be honored in the correct forum, the correct venue. I just don't think this is it. I think they've broadened this so much that it's losing its meaning. And like I say, where's George Benson? All right. I keep saying that, but I think of a guy who, definitely had some radio hits in the early 80s. But he's just a really great guitarist, a great vocalist, and he embodies his own spirit. Maybe it's not the rock and roll spirit. I don't know. But see, I think that's more about genre. And that's why he'll never be considered probably for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And maybe he shouldn't be. But I'm saying, if you're opening this up for interpretation this much, then you should be inviting all kinds of people in who you'd never consider. And I think it seems like you're only focused on the hip hop and rap scene. Why not go into the folk scene, go into the jazz scene, go into a number of world music, reggae? Come on. I mean, you got to be broad and open-minded. It's a big tent, right? Anyway, I've vented enough about this topic. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. And yes, you can join me on Patreon for just $1 a month, where we can talk about this issue. And you can find like-minded folks who maybe share your views, or maybe they don't. Not sure, but you can find out if you join. Thanks again, and I will see y'all soon.